Hello everyone, you're listening to Kaikki Uusiksi, a critical podcast about society, the economy, work, climate, culture, politics and all other things human. My name is Toivo Haimi.
And my name is Jussi Virkkunen.
Jussi, we're just ordinary Finnish lads with a Finnish language podcast, aren't we? Why on earth are we speaking in English?
That's a brilliant question, Toivo. By way of exception, this episode is in English because we have a very special guest with us today. Welcome to the show, Clive Lewis, Labour MP for, sorry for my pronunciation, Norwich South.
Perfect pronunciation. Perfect pronunciation.
Great. Clive, you're quite solidly on the left wing of the Labour Party in the UK. As I can gather, you believe in trade unionism, equal rights for LGBTQ people, nationalisation of key industries, and so forth, correct?
Yeah, public ownership, I would say. Yes, well, we can talk about that, but nationalisation, I think there are new models of ownership, of public ownership we can think about rather than older 20th century models, but definitely public ownership, democratisation.
Excellent. Right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about how the Labour left is doing, both in and out of Parliament, and what the left can do to influence policy if and when Labour win the next general election. Right, so the Corbyn years of the Labour Party are now officially over. Labour leader Keir Starmer announced yesterday on Wednesday that the former party leader Mr Jeremy Corbyn, MP for Islington North, will be forbidden to stand as a Labour candidate for the Islington North constituency in the next general election or a possible by-election. What are your thoughts on that, Clive?
I think, look, there are a number of... First of all, I think you need to say that it's a very dangerous time for people like myself on the left in my party talking about these issues. But I intend to speak out and to say what my views are. This broke whilst we were in Finland, visiting various left-wing and social democratic institutions and organisations and individuals. First of all, it's an attack on party democracy. And I think the first thing to understand is that the Labour Party in the United Kingdom has always had an interesting relationship with democracy, even though it is ostensibly an institution within UK democracy, and arguably some would say a democratic institution. It says that on our membership card. The reality is there is a high degree of centralisation, and members come to the conference and vote through policies which can then often be ignored by Labour leaders. And that's happened on PR now just recently. So to say that we're a democratic party, we're a political entity that operates within a democratic framework.
Right.
And so I think what's happened to Jeremy is part of a trend. And it's kind of on a scale of how democratic our party is. At the moment, it's in one of its more authoritarian periods. And, look, this is an insult and an attack on the democratic rights of the party members in Jeremy Corbyn's constituency, Labour Party. And I think when you look at it like that, this is wrong. Jeremy Corbyn has made mistakes, but he's also dedicated his life to the Labour Party. And I think for many people, this will seem vindictive and wrong. I think there's another issue here, which is about the right of the party that have kind of dominated under Keir Starmer. And it's frankly, we will have a better and more robust government if we have dissenting voices within it. They will pull together, but ultimately you have a more robust and you have stronger positions when you've had that debate inside the party. And I don't think Keir Starmer and the leadership should be scared of having voices who may have different views to them. That's what democracy is about, ultimately. Right. So I think ultimately here, I think it says something about Keir Starmer's leadership, where he feels that he has to crush all dissent and alternative voices. There is a richness of pluralism that enhances our democracy and will enhance a future Labour government. And I really wish that he and those around him would understand and acknowledge that. And it doesn't feel that they are.
Right. Do you think Mr Starmer is trying to make a clean break with the Corbyn years of the Labour Party by breaking with the legacy and in effect the person of Mr Jeremy Corbyn?
Without doubt. Yeah. And it's clear that the right wing will try to link Keir Starmer to Jeremy Corbyn.
Right.
They do that at every opportunity.
Yeah, because he was in the shadow cabinet.
They do, and they try to do that. But sometimes it's like if you sometimes it's like about saying, hold on a second. If he wants to say we've made changes, we've moved away, but you know what? We're not gonna vilify this individual. This is my party now, and it will go in this direction and do these things. You can say what you want, but I think rather than respond to that and run scared of those comments, I think Keir Starmer has made a mark on the party. He has done his own thing. He has taken the party in the direction that he wants to go. I don't think there's any need to completely crush and destroy Jeremy Corbyn. And let's not forget, there is a legacy of the left under Jeremy Corbyn, which is still playing out, which is that the party, whatever you think about it, although it has moved to the right from the Corbyn era, it is still now way to the left from what it was under the Blair era. And the Corbyn years play a big part in that, because we made ground on the economic arguments against austerity, about investment in renewables and the Green New Deal. There were things that we achieved under the Corbyn administration, which frankly, the right of the party may want to acknowledge that. But the reality is the left has had a massive influence on this current administration. And I think from my perspective, I want to be a part of a Labour government because I know we're pushing on an open door. And I think that's where there are some on the left that don't want to engage. I'm that part of the left that says, actually, we should be pushing on this open door because it's in the best interest of our constituents and for a better country.
So although Keir Starmer has made this move, you still see yourself that you have a place in the party.
Well, we'll see when I get back to the United Kingdom and after this podcast. I mean, look, we have first past the post a voting system, which mathematically basically only allows for two main political parties. And the Conservative Party wins 3 times more than the Labour Party. But because the Labour Party is on that 2-place podium, it has historically opted for first past the post. It's meant to give stable government. I find that quite laughable given recent years. But that means that there is no place for a split on the left. Yeah. You're punished. And there are members of the left and also the right under Corbyn, Change UK. They split, Chuka Umunna and others split. They've disappeared into... Look how that went.
Exactly. And, that's the danger. Because of first past the post, the discipline of first past the post and requiring 2 key political parties, you split from the Labour Party or you're kicked out. And pretty much it's game over. Now, there is a move within the party and the membership and the affiliates, the trade union affiliates, that is supportive of PR. That doesn't mean the party would split. I think if we adopted PR, and that's a possibility under when we come up to potential negotiations, if there's a minority administration, that could be on the cards because many of the smaller parties definitely want that. Then that's a possibility. But I think if the Labour Party is prepared to change its political culture to one of cooperation and consensus, it will survive. But it has to change in that way, which, what we've seen in the last kind of 24 hours, 48 hours, isn't the case.
Right. Party split is something that the Finnish left to also...
yeah, I think it's a left thing generally, isn't it?
Yeah, we all know that thing. But anyway, so former Labour leader, as mentioned, Jeremy Corbyn, stepped down as leader in 2019 after a disastrous general election result. That gave the Tory party another, let's say, 5 years in government. Let's see how long it will take. Yeah. But anyway, the new Labour leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, as said, first of all, now he got rid of Jeremy Corbyn, but he went on to consolidate his leadership and got rid of most of left-wing frontbenchers, such as Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell, for example. But anyway, so Labour frontbench is now far more centre-left than it was under Jeremy Corbyn. So let's go back. Like the question is, what's next for the Labour left?
So the first thing to say is that let's not forget, under Jeremy Corbyn's administration, it was a broad church. We had people from across the political spectrum, including Keir Starmer. That isn't the case now, and I think we're all the poorer for it. That's the first thing. I think in terms of what next for the left, I think for now we're looking to survive is the first thing, and that's a sad thing to say. But I think I'm being honest. It's about making sure that that there's the Labour Party, because of first past the post, covers a really broad spectrum of political views from people who you would consider to be kind of with Marxist tendencies, complete socialists, through to kind of pro-American, free marketeers, literally, and we cover a really broad spectrum. Whereas in your country there are under PR there are splits there. So I think the first thing to say is that the Labour Party inherently has a history of being a broad church, and that can work, and you can make it work to your advantage. But what we have at the moment is a small section of people within the party, on the right of the party, that want to completely dominate and want no discourse, no pluralism. And I think that's bad for democracy generally, especially with the rising authoritarianism. And the Labour Party swims in that sea. You can't have, rising authoritarianism, institutional collapse, and 50 years of neoliberalism and its impacts on democracy without it affecting different institutions, including the Labour Party. And I think that's a function of that. Yeah. But where does the left go now? Well, let's get past this next week, next couple of weeks. Let's see if many of us are re-elected at the next election, which I hope is the case. And the role for the Labour left then, I think, is to advocate. This is an open door, and it's to advocate and to be the conscience of the party, to make sure that it lives up to the expectations that the electorate will have. And let's not forget, in the UK, and I'm not sure here in Finland, but the public are way ahead on climate issues, on public ownership issues, on wealth taxes. There is growing support for that without many political champions. Yeah. They've arrived there in their own way. And if you had those political champions there, you could be on the crest of a wave to make quite radical changes. So I see the role of the left as championing those key issues and making sure that the next Labour government, if we have one, is pushing those through. And that doesn't mean necessarily conflict, but it means reminding the party about why it's in government. It's not there to be just in power simply for its own sake. It's there to make transformational changes. And I sometimes fear that some of my colleagues are just so obsessing about the finishing line. They're not thinking about what comes beyond that and how you're going to make those transformative changes, especially in a political system, voting system, which rewards the right wing 3 times as much with political success than it does the left.
Yeah. Well, the issues that the Labour left and Momentum, the movement, campaigned for in 2015 and 2016, they haven't gone away. On the contrary, they've intensified during subsequent years of Tory misrule after the general elections of 2017 and 2019. Here's my question. Why hasn't the Labour left capitalised on this? Why hasn't it, stirred up the flames of rebellion against this Tory misrule? Is it because they've lacked a clear leadership figure? Or
Well, obviously the Labour Party is benefiting as a whole. Yeah. The Labour Party is benefiting from that. So it wouldn't necessarily fall to the left of the party to benefit from it because we're a cohesive whole as a political party. The Labour Party is definitely benefiting that, hence being 20 points ahead in most of the polls, which is phenomenal. It's a phenomenal lead. And we can come on to that maybe in a little bit about how that will pan out during the general election. But we are benefiting as a party. But I mean, I think the thing that I would say is that gives us an opportunity. There is institutional collapse taking place in the UK. Brexit has been a disaster. We, as one of the key experimenters of neoliberalism in the 1950s, under 1979 and 80s under Margaret Thatcher, and the kind of Reagan Thatcher axis, we are at the cutting edge. We have damaged our welfare state. We've smashed the NHS. We took part in austerity. Both our Social Democratic Party, the Labour Party, and the Conservatives bought into the whole austerity concept. We've been under attack for 50 years from a kind of social democratic, socialist perspective. And so there's an opportunity now for the Labour Party to really begin to unpick and undo some of that damage. And I think that's what the left want. And I think that's where a lot of the public are. Definitely our membership. Yes, the membership has shifted to the right slightly, in part because it's more that many of the younger and more left people have left or been thrown out of the party. But you must remember that many of the people, and I think the people around Keir Starmer and Keir Starmer himself are aware that many of the people who remain in the party, the core of the party, those supporters, they voted for Corbyn either once or twice. And so politically, what the Corbyn manifestos of 2017 and 2019 produced economically and socially, there's a broad support for that in the party. And in 2017, we saw Brexit aside, when we had a better position on Brexit, we had a position on Brexit which wasn't such a political issue at the time in 2017. we came within 2,000 votes of winning, and, that shows you that manifesto, the 2017 manifesto, was a radical manifesto by British standards, and it came with a whisker of winning. So those ideas, the British public are not averse to them. You can win on a manifesto like that. And that's what I think part of the role of the left is, to constantly remind the leadership that actually you can go further and faster. Now, you would think rationally that that's a good thing to have, but you have to remember the history of the British Labour Party, which, as someone called Paul Mason once said to me, the last line of defence of British capitalism runs through the shadow cabinet of the Labour Party. When you begin to understand the Labour Party, there is a section of the Labour Party that is part of the British establishment and wants to see British capitalism succeed at any cost. And so there's that constant tension within the Labour Party between the more socialist elements and between the more kind of pro-establishment capitalism elements. And, some people don't want Labour to push too far, too fast. So, yeah.
Yeah. Tony Benn once said that the Labour Party is not a socialist party, but there are socialists in the Labour Party, just like there are Christians in the Church of England.
That's a very, very good...
Toivo is really good at it.
Brilliant.
Yeah. But, Clive, you said that the Labour membership has shifted to the right, or to the centre, if you will. Do you think a genuinely left-wing candidate could win leadership of the party again, like Corbyn did in 2015?
Yes, they could,
Yeah.
because of the very nature of social democracy and the way that the Labour movement operates and works. What we're seeing at the moment is a party leadership that is trying to lock out the left. So, in the under Blair and Peter Mandelson, there was an expression which was, "We'll lock the left into a tomb."
Yeah, a sealed tomb.
And obviously Corbynism represents the fact that the tomb was breached and the spirit of the left kind of escaped and caused havoc.
The loony left is on the loose.
So it's like some kind of wispy vampiric ghost kind of getting out. And so...
Right, great image.
It's obviously now what I think some would like to do is they wouldn't just they want to kind of concrete the tomb over and then throw a few hand grenades in to make sure to finish the job off, which is a kind of not a very pleasant view. But it's quite clear that they want to... There's an expression that some on the right talk about, which is never again. We won't let this happen. And obviously that's wrapped up in the issue of anti-Semitism and so on, which was a massive issue. And it's obviously linked to the Corbyn, the Corbyn era and so on and so forth. So there's a real hardcore element that I think want to stop but that, kind of kicking the left out of the Labour Party, trying to hold them out. It's like, then what party are you?
Yeah.
Because the membership, many of the membership will identify as Marxists. Many of the membership will identify as socialists or as left-wing social democrats. So what are you doing? You're just cutting off the head, but the actual body, many of the trade unionists will have those politics. No. It makes no sense. It's a short-term act. So yes, there can be a leader of the Labour Party. Rules can be changed. Memberships do change. People do move on. But again, as I say, if that's under a first-past-the-post system and a first-past-the-post Labour Party, under PR, I think it'd be a very different situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And clock is ticking, so unfortunately we have... No worries. Unfortunately, we have to jump or move on.
You're the boss.
To the next topic. And can I talk a little bit about Labour Party and the political situation in the UK in general, which we obviously have been doing already.
Yeah.
But anyway, Labour currently, as you mentioned, has a staggering lead over the Tories in the polls. 20%, 25%, it depends, but it's more than 20% in the polls. And basically Labour is now waiting for a landslide victory, and landslide is, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
Basically, translated into the seats in the House of Commons, Labour would win an absolute unprecedented majority if the election would be held today. Clive, we've already talked about Labour left and the problems it is facing, but what kind of role do you see that the Labour left could play in the government with Keir Starmer as the Prime Minister?
Okay, so I think just to unpack that, I think we have to kind of there's a big kind of warning klaxon on the 20% lead. And so there are a couple of things that we need to take into account here. First of all, those poll leads will close. They always do for the Conservatives. They're the establishment party. They have the media on their side. And they also have a lot of the institutional structures on their side. You know, they have wealth, power, influence, the City of London, money. They are the de facto establishment party, and they run United Kingdom PLC, okay? And Labour are the kind of challengers and always have been. So the first thing is they close the poll. Secondly, they've done two things. They've put through new changes to the boundaries, which mean that they're going to create extra MPs, most of which will be Conservative. So that's going to give them an inbuilt advantage. Secondly, they've brought in straight from the south of the United, the kind of Republicans in particularly the south of the US. They've brought in this kind of voter suppression policies, which basically now means that in the past anyone could go to a polling station and the staff at the polling station try to help you to vote. You didn't need any ID. You just need to tell your address, your name. If you were registered, you could vote. What they now want is certain forms of ID. And we know there are 2 million voters, disproportionately working class voters who don't have those forms of ID and who will now struggle to vote. That will disproportionately impact Labour. So those two together are going to have an impact. Plus the media, plus first past the post. And I very quickly need to tell you how first past the post works. So under PR, you have a dispersal. Votes matter. Everyone's vote counts. Under first past the post, they weigh up and many people's votes don't matter. And what happens is you have a key number of constituencies, swing constituencies, with about 1 million people on average of voters. And these 1 million voters or so, it's kind of concentrated ability in those swing seats for the newspapers and the right and whoever it is to kind of dictate what the policies are and what the political issues are. So you find then that both parties then talk about those issues. And they're often issues which are always going to be more difficult for Labour, issues around immigration or culture and so on and so forth, which the right are more comfortable with. So you have all of these inbuilt advantages for the Conservative Party. And what you will see is, this is the final bit, you would also see the fact that Labour is a party of the United Kingdom. The Conservatives have historically always been a party of the South and South East. Okay, and the Liberals and Labour were from the kind of the Wash, which is a kind of river that comes down from the north of that. And Scotland has now disappeared for Labour. And Labour has never won an election without winning in Scotland. And so now that the SNP, the Scottish National Party, has basically taken the vast majority of those seats and probably will do at the next election. I'm not talking us down. It's just a psephological fact. We may gain a few. We won't make up enough. So that means that the 20% lead will probably collapse. And for a majority of one, we need a swing that has never been achieved by any Labour Party in the history of UK politics, which is a 13.4% swing. For a majority of one, we need to win 124 extra seats for a majority of one. So I think the most likely outcome is that Labour will either be the biggest party with no overall control, in which case it will have to basically operate with other political parties to try and get through its King's Speech, which is the political programme, or it will be the second biggest party after the Conservatives. And I know that sounds difficult to kind of comprehend, but it's possible. And therefore, because the Conservatives have no friends left in Parliament, it will be for Labour to say, right, back us or sack us, here's our political programme. Do you want to let the Tories back in? No. We will then, this is our programme, you need to vote for us, Liberals, Welsh nationalists, Scottish nationalists, Greens. And that's how he'll move forward until such point he says, look at this chaos, I can't lead the country like this, you can see what I've done so far, let's go back to the country, we'll have a snap election and give me the mandate I need to govern this country properly.
Like Mr. Wilson did.
Like Harold Wilson, and that's been made possible by the fact that the Tories have now undone the Fixed Term Parliament Act. You have a Fixed Term Parliament Act here. We don't have one. We've repealed that. So I think there will be, under those circumstances, you can see why some on the Labour right are concerned that having a vibrant left and vocal left that hasn't been put on a very strong leash or completely crushed in those delicate situations could have a disproportionate influence on the outcome. Now, I don't think you should see it like that. I think you should see it as the fact that we are a team and that we will listen to all the views and find a synergetic position. You know, by that I mean a synergy of all the views to move forward rather than trying to crush one wing, you know. So, yeah.
Right. let's take a step back because, as you mentioned, Britain is on the brink of institutional collapse, as you said. And
it's already happening.
Yeah, it's already happening. And 13 years of Tory misrule haven't really helped the case. In fact, it's only gotten worse under the Tories and under the coalition. There's been a mass wave of industrial action, of strikes in the UK. The NHS is in its worst crisis since its inception in the 1940s. Wages are falling. Inflation is on the rise. There's a cost of living crisis and an energy crisis. So here's my question. How will Labour fix the country? Because the country needs fixing.
It does.
What policies does Labour have to offer to working class people and their families to believe in a Labour government that they will fix it?
So obviously we're expecting, thank you for that, we're expecting a draft manifesto or a narrow manifesto in September. And we'll begin to see. But we already can begin to see the outline of, so for example, I've put down a private member's bill for universal energy tariff, for universal free energy. So basically everyone in every family would get green energy to a certain amount for their basic needs. The Labour front bench are now looking at that as a possibility, something. So that's it's what we call retail policies, which will make a massive difference to people's lives. I think they, in terms of public ownership of key utilities, we've already said on rail, for example, as the franchise come up, they'll come back under public ownership. So that's a good news story there. So I think there will be some things that you'll begin to see that Labour will make a difference on. I think the jury's out on austerity. Will Labour buy into austerity light? I think given some of the smoke signals from the front bench Treasury team, that looks likely. But you know what? Labour are going to inherit the worst economic situation they will ever have inherited, ever. And you know what? Frankly, I think people are expecting there will be a very small window of opportunity for the Labour government to possibly, in a perma crisis, which we currently inhabit, with an economic downturn and with, a small majority or a minority administration to push through some quite radical changes with very little, fiscal leeway. I think one of the key things that we also have to do, apart from having those retail policies, having those economic reform policies, and this isn't always that sexy on the left, but Britain is not a constitutional democracy, it's a constitutional monarchy. You need to get that into your head. We are a feudal system with a monarchy that embodies inequality. We have, Parliament has no sovereignty. It rests with the king and with the prime minister. So we really need to change our voting system to make sure that the Tories don't have that 3-1 built-in advantage. We need to have a written constitution. We need to build new institutions fit for the 21st century. And we need to understand that, the next time that there is an election under PR with a constitution that's been written by the people of the country, that we can actually begin to then disperse power away from those vested interests. Until we do that, we will simply be playing for time and handing ourselves back to the Conservatives in a few years.
Getting rid of the House of Lords, for or against?
100%, but what you replace it with needs to be carefully thought through and part of a wider constitutional set of changes. The United Kingdom is breaking up. What we know, it was an imperial construct built for various reasons. It's coming apart. Brexit has put rocket boosters on that. Scotland voted to stay. England and Wales voted to leave. What needs to happen now is a massive constitutional fix. There can be a relationship between Scotland, England, and Wales, but then we need to share and pool sovereignty. And I think until we grasp that, many of the issues. Do we go back into the EU or not? It's displacement activity. We wouldn't be allowed back into the EU. I think we would be seen as a dodgy case. I think we have to sort ourselves out democratically, economically, and then we can think about whether you want us back and whether we can come back in. I would love to come back in, but I know if we come back in the state we're in now, we'll be rolling back out pretty soon.
It's not happy to hear, but it's something to hear that some countries are in a bigger mess than Finland, according to conservatives. But the conservatives,
you guys have got it so good. I mean, you've got it good, but it's interesting being over here. We've seen that there's so many very similar issues that we're confronting, or in fact, exactly the same. But you do so from a base of strong public services, relatively strong public services, social cohesion, more good social cohesion, and levels of inequality which are far lower than the UK, which I think is a disruptive element in our country.
Because we don't have a landed aristocracy in this country.
Exactly, and actually it reminds me of a remark I heard years ago that actually Jeremy Corbyn was only putting forward a social democratic agenda.
Yes,
actually,
right. It was nothing radical about it.
Yeah,
not by European standards.
Yeah, basically, what people saw as an extremely radical agenda was social democrat.
The truly radical agendas of the Labour Party, for example, were in the beginning of the 20th century with Keir Hardie, or in 1945 with Clement Attlee. Those were radical programs.
Corbynism and Corbyn are described as extremists. The true extremists are the Conservatives and the right wing in our country, and I think we must remember that. We look at what's happening to the climate. We look at what's happening where people are sinking in boats because of economic and climate displacement. You look at the state of the world, and it is capitalism, and it is a right-wing agenda that is driving it. It is an extremist agenda, and actually, what we're proposing is humanitarian. It's based on human rights, and it's about making sure we have a sustainable future. That is an extreme. That's necessary.
Yeah. One more question. You mentioned that one of the risks, basically, for the Labour government would be to accept a kind of an austerity light approach. What do you mean by it?
Well, the Conservative government have basically announced a set of new what they call fiscal rules, and just to kind of for context, they break these fiscal rules whenever they want. And then bring them back in when they need to, basically with new rules around them. And so obviously they have blown the budget. There was no magic money tree. Then there was money to be found for the DUP deal. Then there was money found for COVID, which we always knew was there. So there is money there, but obviously they love to obsess about debts and about the fact that the economy is a household. And
we know something about that.
I've heard about this, and so that buying into that is foolish.
Yeah,
and that's been proven, since 2010 and 2000, since 2010 and the change of government and the austerity that came in, and Labour bought into that, and we've seen that left us less prepared for COVID. It's seen the demise of our public services. The NHS now is in the state it's in part because of austerity. It does nothing, and the economics of it are misguided at best. And I think if you listen now to the consensus amongst mainstream capitalist economists, it is that actually in a downturn like this, you need to invest in the long term. And so, those fiscal rules that the government have brought out, I think were a trap for the Labour Party, because once you accept them, if you break them to do what's right, you've broken a contract that you verbally said that you will stick to, despite the fact that they break them all the time. And if by buying into it, I think it is a bit of a trap. We shouldn't have done it. I guess what I believe our front bench is telling themselves is that the £28 billion fiscal injection that they've promised for the Green New Deal will lead to, and the supply side reforms that they will make, whatever they look like, and also getting a better deal with Europe, or some deal with Europe, will mean that we will see growth in the economy, and that growth will bring the tax returns, which means that austerity won't be necessary. I think that's a big risk. I think there are lots of unknowns, and I think we shouldn't have committed to something which is the Conservatives' fiscal irresponsibility and economic illiteracy. We shouldn't have bought into that. But I'm not the front bench anymore.
And austerity has never, ever worked anywhere. It's great for the economy. It can balance a budget, but it absolutely wrecks working class communities and working class people and their families by defunding the public utilities that they so desperately need.
We in the UK, I made a speech in Parliament in 1918 after the war. There's a Tory came in and he brought in what's called Get His Axe. And they had an opportunity to invest and to treat those war heroes with respect and invest in their communities. They chose to cut the welfare state, to cut support, to cut housing. People were thrown onto the streets and so on and so forth. After the Second World War, the Labour government didn't make that mistake. They built the NHS, the welfare state, and they said to people, you protected this country, we will now build this country and you will have your fair share. After COVID, the Conservative government had the same opportunity to rebuild the welfare state, to the key workers they were clapping for, they're now slapping. So they could have had sectoral bargaining. They could have made sure that they had a fair, decent pay. Instead, they've gone for the 1917 option, which is that you will pay for COVID. Not the people who profited from COVID, not those who became billionaires, who became wealthy, but working people. The key workers that risked their lives, the working class people of the United Kingdom, are now being told that they must pay through austerity. And frankly, as a party of working people, we should never accept that.
Have you got anything to add to this?
No, well, actually, I tried to add something, and it's I'll try to formulate something, and that goes like this. Owen Jones wrote in the book The Establishment and How They Got Away with It. He wrote that the neoliberalists, they were preparing to take over, like for decades. They from the 1950s they started like preparations for their time, and then the problem for the left when the in the early 2008 when the collapse of the whole world financial market came, the left wasn't ready for it. How do you see? We talk a lot about the problems of the left, but how do you see? It's like is the left, maybe easier way to put it, is the Labour left now ready to push forward that kind of a change that is needed?
Yeah. So the Montpellier set, von Hayek and so on, and the neoliberal organisation that you're discussing. I think it's possible. One of the reasons I'm over here as a member of the British left in Finland is to build those international links. I think Brexit, we took them for granted when we were part of the European Union. We now need to, deliberately foster them. I think we could go into kind of splendid isolation if we don't. There's a desperate need for internationalism. We can see that because the problems of the world are international, they're global. And the last 50 years hasn't been just about the erosion of democracy in our own countries. It's been about the erosion of international democracy and the institutions that can force corporations and the wealthy to do what's required to be able to decarbonise and to ensure that our biosphere is habitable. I think that given what capitalism done, and this particular model of capitalism has done to the environment, given what it's done to democratic institutions, and let's not forget, the climate crisis isn't just an economic market failure, it's also a failure of democracy, because people don't vote for the climate crisis. They don't vote for climate collapse. And yet that's what's happening because the economy is on autopilot. It's about making profit maximization. And so I think ultimately there is an opportunity. More and more people can now begin to see that if we want to get ourselves out of this hole, we are going to have to, at best, reform capitalism and possibly replace it with something which actually takes into account an economy which can actually be sustainable, which can look out for the interests of 7 billion people. It has to look after 7 billion people and help them, many of them, make the jump into a clean, sustainable future. If we don't do that, we saw with COVID what happens when you don't think on international terms. When you hoard vaccines, what happens? COVID mutates and comes back at you. It's the same with the climate crisis. If we don't learn from that, if we don't build that international socialism, if we don't build that international cooperation, if the left don't understand that actually the climate and people and workers' rights and welfare states, all of these are interconnected. I think there is a real opportunity there for us to convey that. And the climate crisis is an opportunity for us to do that. The right understand that. That's why they spent years denying it. And now they're saying there's nothing we can do about it. And I think the climate crisis really is the fulcrum where we on the left can now make a convincing case that there is an alternative. We were told there is no alternative, Tina. There is an alternative, and it looks like this, and it will benefit you, your family, your children, but the broader planet. And I think there is hope if we want to look for it.
Planet for the many, not the few.
I like it.
Thank you very much for this discussion, Clive Lewis, Labour MP for Norwich South.
Thank you.
Tässä oli tämänkertainen Kaikki Uusiksi podcast. Kiitos, että kuuntelit. Muistathan myös tilata meidät sieltä, mistä podcastisi saatkaan. Jos tämä keskustelu herätti sinussa ajatuksia, niin kerro niistä meille suomeksi ja kautta tai englanniksi. Meidät löytää helpoiten Instagramista Miukumauku Kansan uutiset. Voit myös lähettää postikortin osoitteeseen Hämeentie 105A 00550 Helsinki. Kaikki Uusiksi podcastia tuottaa Kansan uutiset eli Kusari eli KU, joka on tolkuttoman hyvä lehti. KU ilmestyy kerran kuussa ja helmikuun lehti on onnellisilla tilaajilla jo varmasti luettuna. Tilaa siis KU itsellesi kotiin kannettuna erittäin edulliseen hintaan osoitteesta ku.fi. Nyt erikoistarjous 3 kuukautta 19 € menee hakemaan se, kun se on vielä lämmintä. Mun nimeni on Toivo Haimi. Mun kanssa keskustelivat KU:n päätoimittaja Jussi Virkkunen ja Ison-Britannian parlamentin alahuoneen jäsen Clive Lewis. Ensi viikkoon, moi moi!